In the small town of Rockville, Connecticut, on the last day of July in 1976, Connie Margotta Dabate took her first breath. She was the youngest child of Kenneth and Cindy Margotta, a final, perfect addition to their family. Her older brother Keith would carry with him forever the memory of their father taking him to the hospital, of pressing his face against the cool glass to see his baby sister for the first time. When the nurse presented the tiny, bundled infant at the hospital window, a new star ignited in the family's constellation. From that very first glimpse, Connie was their light. Growing up between the neighboring towns of Vernon and Ellington, Connie seemed to possess a Midas touch. Everything she pursued turned to gold. After graduating from Ellington High School in 1995, she continued her education at the University of Connecticut, earning her degree in 1999. Those who knew her then remember a young woman who didn't just walk through life, but danced, pulling everyone onto the floor with her infectious, boundless enthusiasm. After university, Connie carved out an impressive career in the competitive world of pharmaceutical sales. She moved between several companies before finding her stride at Reckitt Benckiser, where she wasn't just a sales representative, she was a star. Her professional profile painted a picture of relentless success, consistently ranked in the top 20% of the company, a three-time recipient of the prestigious President's Club Award. But for Connie, it was never just about the accolades. She was genuinely passionate, taking immense pride in being a trusted resource for the physicians and pharmacists she worked with. Yet for all her professional triumphs, her true north, her greatest source of joy, was her family. On the 4th of July in 2003, she married Richard Dabate, a computer network administrator she had been dating for several years. Richard was 2 years her junior and a study in contrasts. Where Connie was an open book, warm and outgoing, Richard was more reserved, his humor offbeat and quirky, his mind wired for the technical. Friends saw them as an odd but complementary pairing. The couple built their life in a handsome, 4-bedroom colonial home at 7 Birchview Drive in Ellington, a property valued today at over $634,000. Soon the house was filled with the sounds of children. Their first son, Richard Jr., whom they called RJ, was born in 2006, followed by Connor in 2009. Motherhood was the role Connie was born to play. When Connor was born with a cleft lip, a condition requiring a series of challenging medical treatments, Connie became her unwavering champion. She navigated the long drives back and forth to Boston for doctor's appointments, all while simultaneously caring for her own father, who was locked in a difficult battle with leukemia. Her friends saw it clearly. Despite all her success in the corporate world, Connie's proudest accomplishment was being a fiercely loving and devoted mother. In her neighborhood, she was more than just a resident. She was a beacon, earning the nickname the sunshine of so many lives. She poured her energy into the Ellington Ambulance Corps, serving as its vice president for years. She was the one organizing fundraisers, delivering homemade meals to sick neighbors, her hand always the first in the air when someone needed help. She had a rare gift for turning a collection of houses into a genuine community, a family. From the outside, the Dabates had crafted the American dream, a beautiful home in a quiet suburb, 2 successful careers, with Connie as the undeniable primary breadwinner, and 2 bright, happy boys. Friends would later describe them as a normal couple, prone to the same marital fiction most people experience, often centered on the perennial issues of money and spending habits. But beneath this picture-perfect facade, a dark and intricate web of deception was being woven, one that would ultimately lead to an unimaginable and brutal tragedy. By 2015, while the family's holiday cards still showed smiling faces, those closest to Connie began to see the strain behind her eyes. The sunshine seemed a little dimmer. She was more stressed than usual, and the source of her anxiety was almost always the family's finances. Richard had cultivated spending habits that were becoming a serious point of concern. He had a tendency to withdraw money from their accounts without discussion, and mysterious charges for things like visits to a local strip club began to raise unnerving questions. But the most corrosive secret Richard was keeping had nothing to do with money. Her name was Sarah Ganza. Richard and Sarah's history stretched all the way back to junior high school in Manchester. Their connection had sparked into brief, clandestine romantic encounters in 2005, 2007, and 2008, all while he was married to Connie. After Sarah's own marriage ended in 2014, she moved back to Manchester and the old friends reconnected. By May of 2015, their rekindled friendship had ignited into a full-blown affair. Just 1 month later, in June, Sarah discovered she was pregnant with Richard's child. When confronted with the news, Richard didn't panic. Instead, he made a promise. He assured Sarah he was already planning to divorce Connie, that this was the catalyst they needed to finally build a future together. Sarah would later testify that she never pressured him, never gave him an ultimatum to break up his family. She was prepared to raise their child on her own if it came to that. But Richard persisted, weaving a tapestry of promises about a life that was just around the corner. In June, he told Sarah divorce preparations were underway, even claiming he was fixing up the house to get it ready for sale. By August, his story had shifted. He was having second thoughts about leaving Connie. Then, in November, he reversed course again, insisting that he and Connie were finally on the same page about divorcing. This emotional whiplash was exhausting for Sarah, now 7 months pregnant and desperate to plan for her future. There were times she would try to cut him off, telling him to leave her alone, but Richard always found a way back, armed with fresh assurances and renewed promises. All the while, Connie remained blissfully unaware of the affair, of the baby, of the second life her husband was leading. From her perspective, their marriage was hitting a rough patch, a storm they could weather together. In November 2015, she sent Richard a series of romantic text messages, including an intimate photo of herself in lingerie with the caption, "I'm ready for you, big boy." She was fighting for her marriage, completely oblivious to the fact that it was already a casualty. The day before Connie sent that heartfelt message, Richard had texted his pregnant mistress, assuring her that he and his wife talked about the divorce and are on the same page. 2 days later, he told Sarah they were pursuing a slow-moving divorce to make it easier on the kids. The story was a complete fabrication. Friends and family who spoke with investigators were unanimous. Connie never once mentioned divorce. If anything, she seemed more committed than ever to working through their problems. State police would eventually interview nearly 24 witnesses, and the narrative was consistent. While some noted her stress over Richard's spending, the idea of ending her marriage was never on the table. Connie knew something was deeply wrong, though. She could feel a profound anxiety tightening its grip on her life, even if she couldn't name its source. On the morning of December 23rd, at 8:58 a.m., she sent a Facebook message to a psychotherapist. "Requesting a hypnosis appointment," she wrote, "because there's a lot going on right now." It was an appointment she would never get to keep. Richard, meanwhile, was feeling the pressure from all sides. His cousin, Lori Gardner, later testified that Richard had confided in her about Sarah's pregnancy at a party that summer. He was terrified of what his family would think, petrified of becoming the family's black sheep. His best friend, Seth Robertson, recalled conversations where Richard voiced his fears about divorce, convinced that men always lost out, that women inevitably got the house and custody of the children. The walls were closing in on Richard Dabate. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, her patience wearing thin. His finances were a mess, and a divorce would mean dismantling the comfortable lifestyle that Connie's successful career had built. He was staring down the barrel of custody battles, alimony payments, and the public humiliation of his infidelity. Something had to give, and Richard Dabate was about to make a choice that would shatter multiple lives forever. December 23, 2015, dawned like any other Wednesday morning for the Dabate family. 9-year-old RJ and 6-year-old Connor were getting ready for school, buzzing with the excitement of the Christmas holidays just 2 days away. Connie had plans to attend her regular spinning class at the Indian Valley YMCA, a ritual she followed religiously to stay fit and clear her ed. Richard would later tell police that he left the house between 8:30 and 8:40 a.m. to drive to his job. According to his initial story, he was about 5 minutes down the road when he realized he'd forgotten his laptop and turned the car around to go back home. But in the silent language of data, a far different and more sinister story was being written. At 8:26 a.m., someone accessed Facebook from the Dabate home computer. At 8:37 a.m., from that same computer, a Google search was conducted for long-lasting tattoo ideas. This was nearly 10 minutes after Richard claimed he had already left for work. At 8:46 a.m., Connie's Fitbit registered her movements as she left the house for her spinning class. Clipped to her hip was the small, unassuming device, a Fitbit 1. It was her silent companion, a digital chronicler that would, with cold precision, record every step she took on the final morning of her life. 1 minute later, at 8:47 a.m., something crucial happened. The home alarm system was armed using Richard's keychain fob, a remote that only worked within a 500-foot radius of the house. Almost instantaneously, an attempt was made to disarm the same alarm system using Richard's mobile phone. The first attempt failed, but at 8:51 a.m., the system was successfully disarmed via the phone, only to be rearmed again moments later. This strange digital dance would become a critical piece of the puzzle. The keychain fob proved Richard was physically at or very near the house. The immediate phone activity suggested he was trying to manipulate the alarm remotely, as if creating an alibi, but the timeline proved he was still home when he claimed to be miles away. At 8:53 a.m., security cameras at the YMCA captured Connie's arrival. She looked like her usual bright self, ready for a workout. But inside, she learned her class had been canceled. The cameras recorded her leaving again at 9:08 a.m., much earlier than anyone would have expected her to return. Back at 7 Birchview Drive, digital forensics revealed that at 9:18 a.m., someone at the Dabate home computer visited the YMCA website. It was a chilling detail, suggesting Richard may have been checking to see if Connie had actually gone to her class, or perhaps monitoring when she might be heading home. At 9:23 a.m., the garage door at the Dabate home opened. As Connie returned unexpectedly, her Fitbit diligently logged the movement, capturing the exact moment she stepped out of her car and walked into her house for the very last time. For the next 17 minutes, the Fitbit data showed normal patterns of activity. At 10:40 a.m., she posted a video to her Facebook page from inside the house. 6 minutes later, another video went up. These posts, routed through the family's home internet, were digital proof of life. But it was what happened next that would stop time. At 10:05 a.m., Connie's Fitbit recorded its final flurry of movement, 1,217 feet of walking, distributed throughout her house. This was far more than the roughly 125 feet it would take to get from her car to the basement where her body would later be discovered. The data showed she had been moving around casually, perhaps doing household chores or getting ready for her day. Then, at exactly 10:05 a.m., the Fitbit went silent. Forever. 7 minutes later, at 10:12 a.m., the home's panic alarm was triggered from Richard's keychain fob, the only time that morning it had been used. Richard's story was that he received alarm alerts when driving and emailed his boss to say he was heading home to check on a security issue. But his cell phone records told a different tale. His phone was pinging off cell towers near his house all morning, directly contradicting his claim that he was at a bus depot in Broadstone, miles away, checking on advertising displays. When first responders breached the door of 7 Birchview Drive, they walked into a scene of staged chaos that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. They found Richard on the kitchen floor, partially bound to a metal folding chair with zip ties. He had superficial cuts on his legs and torso. He immediately launched into a wild story about a masked intruder, a hulking figure dressed in camouflage with a deep, gravelly voice like the actor Vin Diesel. This intruder, he claimed, had been rummaging through Connie's jewelry. The man demanded money and pins, which he said he provided. When Connie returned home early, Richard shouted for her to run, but for some inexplicable reason, she fled to the basement instead of out the door. The intruder followed her there, a struggle ensued, and he shot her twice with a .357 Magnum revolver, which had never been fired before that day. The weapon, which had never been fired before that day, was wiped clean of any fingerprints. But for the seasoned investigators on the scene, Richard's story was already full of holes. There were no signs of a forced entry. Nothing of value appeared to have been stolen. In fact, cash that would have been an obvious target for any burglar was left untouched. Most damning of all, 3 separate police canine units were brought in to track the intruder's scent. Each one failed to pick up any trail leading away from the property. The first dog, Rocky, seemed utterly confused, repeatedly circling back to Richard and even trying to jump into the ambulance with him. The scene felt less like a crime scene and more like a movie set. Richard's calm demeanor seemed chillingly out of place for a man who had just witnessed his wife's brutal murder. But it would take months of painstaking digital forensics to prove what the detectives suspected from the start. Richard Dabate hadn't been the victim of a home invasion. He had been the sole actor in a meticulously planned murder. What Richard Dabate could never have anticipated was how the very technology that defined modern life would become the chief witness against him. The Connecticut State Police, working alongside prosecutor Matthew Gandansky, launched one of the most comprehensive digital forensic investigations in the state's history. And the centerpiece of their case was Connie's Fitbit. The hip-worn fitness tracker had been recording her movements with scientific precision, creating an incorruptible timeline of her final hour. Dr. Keith Diaz from Columbia Medical Center, an expert on Fitbit accuracy, testified that the devices were nearly perfect at measuring steps, 98% accurate. The Fitbit data blew Richard's timeline to pieces. He claimed Connie was killed around 9:05 a.m., moments after she got home, but her Fitbit proved she was alive and actively moving through her house until 10:05 a.m., a full hour later. In that hour, it recorded 1,217 feet of movement, what Dr. Diaz described as incidental movements, the kind of casual steps one takes while doing normal household activities, not the frantic scramble of a person running for their life. The home alarm system logs were just as damning. The sophisticated system kept a detailed record of every event, time-stamped and sourced. The log showed Richard was physically present at the house all morning, arming and disarming the system from his fob and his phone, shredding his alibi of being miles away at work. At 9:04 a.m., he sent an email to his supervisor from the home computer claiming he was returning to check on an alarm, but the data proved he was already home when he sent it. His computer activity painted a picture not of a man at work, but of a man orchestrating a crime. Investigators also uncovered a series of disturbing internet searches on Richard's computer from the months leading up to the murder. In July and September 2015, he had looked up terms like deadly over-the-counter pill combinations, fast, untraceable homemade poison, and detailed information about the toxin ricin. These searches pointed not to a spontaneous crime of passion, but to a murder that had been premeditated for months. Perhaps the most heartbreaking evidence came from Connie's own digital trail. Her Facebook posts from that morning showed a woman with no inkling of the danger she was in, a woman who felt safe and content in her own home. Her phone data also exposed the full extent of Richard's double life. He had been in constant contact with Sarah Ganza, making 8 calls to her on the day of the murder alone, including a 28-minute conversation that morning, a detail he had conveniently omitted when speaking to the police. Confronted with this mountain of digital evidence, Richard's story began to crumble. He finally admitted to the affair and to lying about his whereabouts, but he clung to his innocence in the murder, claiming he had lied out of fear and a desperate attempt to protect his reputation. But investigators had one final damning piece of evidence: his behavior after Connie's death. Just 5 days after his wife was murdered, Richard attempted to claim her $475,000 life insurance policy. When the claim was denied due to the ongoing investigation, he methodically withdrew over $90,000 from Connie's investment accounts. By the time of his conviction, he had depleted nearly her entire estate, money she had worked tirelessly to save for her son's futures. The boy's aunt would later testify that only $6.24 remained of their mother's savings, not even enough to buy a shirt, shoes, or a backpack. The digital evidence told an undeniable story. Richard Dabate had murdered his wife Connie sometime between 10 and 10:05 a.m., and then staged an elaborate home invasion to cover his crime. For nearly 18 months, Richard Dabate walked free as police painstakingly assembled their case. He continued his relationship with Sarah Ganza, who gave birth to their daughter in February 2016, less than 2 months after Connie's death. During this time, his behavior continued to send up red flags. Neighbors found it bizarre that just days after his wife's violent murder, he was casually texting them to ask about their favorite takeout restaurants. This chilling lack of grief, combined with his laser focus on financial matters, painted a portrait of a man far more concerned with self-preservation than with mourning. Even his best friend, Seth Robertson, began to pull away. Robertson described meeting with Richard weeks after the murder, expecting to comfort a devastated widower. Instead, Richard gave what felt like a rehearsed, emotionless account of the home invasion, then quickly changed the subject to mundane, everyday topics. "I showed up with pockets of tissues, and it never happened," Robertson testified, explaining that the raw anger and profound sadness he expected were simply not there. Connie's family, drowning in their grief, grew increasingly suspicious. Her mother recalled Richard's strange detachment when viewing Connie's body at the funeral home, and his callous comment about her coffin, "They could put the lid on it now," as if speaking of a storage box, not the final resting place of his wife. The investigation was a marathon. Police interviewed dozens of witnesses and analyzed thousands of digital records, collaborating with FBI specialists to ensure every piece of evidence was airtight. On April 14, 2017, the marathon ended. Richard was arrested at his mother's house and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements. When the detective placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he was under arrest, the blood drained from his face. He went white as a sheet, the detective recalled. He was not expecting it. Richard pleaded not guilty and was released on a staggering $1 million bail, his family putting up 5 homes as collateral. This meant he would remain free for another 5 years as the case crawled through the legal system. During that time, Connie's family watched in horror as he continued to liquidate her assets, spending the money she had saved for her children on his own living expenses and legal fees. The trial, repeatedly delayed by the pandemic and other complications, finally began on April 5, 2022. The prosecution laid out over 600 pieces of evidence, with the Fitbit data serving as the star witness. Sarah Gonz's testimony provided the powerful motive. Fighting back tears, she recounted her long, complicated history with Richard and his endless cycle of broken promises. Her pregnancy, the prosecution argued, was the deadline Richard could not escape, the pressure that ultimately drove him to murder. Even at his sentencing, Richard clung to his fabricated innocence. "I am here as an innocent man. I will never stop seeking justice for my wife, Connie, who I love and think of every day." His words rang hollow. On May 10, 2022, the jury found him guilty on all charges. Judge Corinne Klatt sentenced him to 65 years in prison. The conviction brought a fractured sense of peace to Connie's family. "It's a weight lifted off my shoulders, but it's bittersweet. Everything we went through 6 years ago is right in front of us right now." Her mother Cindy struggled through tears to describe her loss. "I just feel this surge from up above. She's here." The Connecticut Supreme Court upheld his conviction in January 2025, cementing the case as a landmark for the use of fitness tracker evidence in a murder trial. Richard Dabate remains incarcerated, with a release date set for the year 2087. His 2 sons now live with their aunt. But the community that Connie had so selflessly served rallied around them, establishing a college fund to help secure their future. A final testament to the woman they all remembered as the sunshine of their lives. Her Fitbit may have been the silent witness that unmasked her killer, but Connie's true legacy lives on in the kindness she sowed. In the end, it was Connie herself, through the life she lived, who brought her own killer to justice. Her family's only request is that the world doesn't remember her for how she died, but for the brilliant light she carried.